Welcome to the Discovering Your Balance podcast with your hosts, Karla and Andrew. We provide balancers with resources for senior care and answers to your questions about aging. Sponsored by Home Care Partners.
Thanks everyone for joining our episode for today. With us we have Brent, and he is the son of a family that we serve, and I'm going to kick it over to Karla.
Great. Well, looking forward to talking to our balancers again. The balancer audience here is someone who's simultaneously balancing roles of maybe being a parent, an uncle, has a career that they're currently working in possibly, and they're also in a caregiver role, whether that be a parent, whether that be a spouse, but nonetheless, they're balancing a lot of things in their life. And so that's our audience that we're speaking with today, providing a lot of different resources for them, and also relating and connecting to that balancer and giving guidance or helpful tips along the way, maybe things that you had to learn the hard way, sort of thing. And so we'll just kind of take it from there. Brent, thanks so much for joining us today. Would you share with the audience kind of your story a little bit and your journey?
Sure. Well, my dad had been living out in Las Vegas for about 6 years, and he was heading back to Nebraska for a family reunion. When he, at a gas station in Utah, he had a stroke. It was a pretty severe stroke. He lost all short-term memory. And it affected his brain, the area of his brain that processes vision. So we were getting ready to start a new school year, and I was just getting done with the staff training day when I got the message that he was in a hospital in Utah. And so it was a pretty sudden thing. We got out to Utah. I met my sister there at an airport in Salt Lake City and drove down and kind of found him in a hospital there. And that was kind of the new normal, finding out that, his memory no longer worked, and, going through the initial kind of emergency stages of getting figured out what was going on to then settling in terms of a plan to move forward with what we were dealing with. So my dad spent about a month in Colorado Springs at an acute rehab place where my sister works, and from there came to Lincoln. We started out in an assisted living facility here, which was really the plan. But after about 3.5 months, and I came to the realization it wasn't a realistic plan, simply because if he doesn't have a short-term memory, he's not going to be comfortable. There's going to be a lot of anxiousness and anxiety, which was very difficult. So there was another sudden thing that happened, and within 24 hours, a decision was made that he would be moving into my house. So he's been living with me for coming up on 2 years.
Wow.
So, yeah. Within
24 hours. I can't imagine what that day was like for you.
It was quite a day, quite a weekend. So it was one of those things you look back on, and there's no regrets in doing it, but you're just like, wow, things changed dramatically, and there wasn't a lot of prep time. I was trying to figure out just how to secure my house, because I had concerns that my dad would get up in the middle of the night and leave the house, or just things like that were safety issues. And so when he first moved in, it was sleeping on the couch to make sure you had a eyesight of all doors and be able to hear, and then getting a security system installed, and just kind of step by step you figure things out. So it was.
And your pet? Opie.
Opie.
Was Opie always in the picture?
Yeah.
Or when did
Opie
join
moved in with me about 8 months before Dino moved in with me.
8 months.
So,
okay.
It's been just another learning thing. Trying to get her trained to be a pet that doesn't. She's about the size of a bear. So, when she's when he first moved in, she was jumping up on people and pawing and just having to train her at the same time as take care of him. It was, it's been tough, and she's never as trained as I'd like her to be, but she's growing up and we're figuring it out, so it goes well. And that has been one of the blessings of him being at my house, because he loves dogs, he loves animals, and that's a constant. He always knows Opie's there, and she does a great job. I had visions of her being a therapy dog and getting her trained to do therapy dog type of things, and she's kind of getting life training as a therapy dog. So she's working every day as one. So.
Well, she very much fits that role of a therapy dog.
Yeah.
Not only is she providing that security, that reassurance, but there's also a lot of sensory. I've definitely seen that, when your dad's petting her and that sort of thing, how it really does relax him and that sort of thing. So
it does.
And a lot of benefits.
Yeah, when he's upset, if you can, just grab a treat and get her to be, and she'll usually go over to him anyway. But if she's not over there getting a treat, and he just starts petting her, and he calms down and it's good to go. So a lot of help.
One of the things that I think of is, what your family was going through when you're finding out this crisis happened, and you're trying to coordinate with your sister and the rest of your family, and you're flying out there, and you have a lot of unknown because you're not sure, maybe when you leave, how long am I going to be out of town, and what does life look like after today? So how did you kind of start to, I'm sure, immediately you're kind of prepping, I need to get things ready to go on this trip. Then you're thinking, the start of long term, we're going to help take care of Dad, and is he going to be okay first? And then where do we go from there? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was a transition into the long term, because the short term and immediate was first. And I am so lucky. I've got friends and family who are absolutely incredible, and who have been, they've been incredible throughout the whole thing. My sister being involved in taking care of occupational therapy and rehab, I ever have a question about anything medical or anything like that, I just call her, and she's great.
That's kind of interesting when you're just talking about Nebraskans are willing to help out, but I think another way that I relate to Nebraskans is very proud and would say oftentimes, I'll try and do as much as I can on my own. And so we've talked before about just giving each other permission to accept help from others, maybe experts in the senior industry, but also your friends. And so, I know a lot of people that would have said, would have tried to do more of the things that you let your support system help you with. So it's good to hear what those outcomes are and how that's different for you when you're like, this was just so great because it was really supportive. And I think that's a thing that's some people would try to take on themselves. You're going to take on too much and not focus as much as you were able to on helping your dad out.
That probably helped alleviate some of the stress.
Yeah.
I can imagine, especially early on, what that stress was like. Part of it was probably a lot of education.
Sure.
I can tell, even just the way you communicate with us and with your dad, and how you involve him in conversations, that you did a lot of education on your own in how you say things, and sometimes how you're creative with how you word things, and it's just very intentional. But
anything specific you would say that you did?
Yeah, what was that process like?
I learned a lot about cortical blindness was one, and again, my sister's been great, because she is great at studying up on that stuff, and I learned most of what I learned from listening to her. So, and then just watching. My background in education has helped a little bit. I know when he was in the hospital in Colorado Springs, there was a person there that was administering a test to try to see if his eyes worked. And watching him do this test, he was asking my dad, point to an object on a sheet of paper, like point to the dog or point to the wagon or things like that. And my dad wasn't doing well. He had just woken him up and was administering this test, and And what I started to realize is the stroke affected his, like, if you say point to a wagon, and you got to know that the person you're telling that to knows what a wagon is. If you don't, then you can't assess their vision, because what's really the problem is their vocabulary. And so I watched that process and talked to the nurse and said, do we know that he can't see the wagon, or do we know really what the problem is? And that was my education background, working with kids and having the same types of things. So it's just been a combination of things. And when you're immersed in something like that, you're looking up things on the internet, and you're finding some research that's good, some that's not so good, and you just kind of piece it all together and figure it out. So a lot of it's experience. When people come over, I know, having lived with my dad, I know that he doesn't like it when people are talking about him and he's in the room. And you can see him escalate and start to get frustrated. And so having to maneuver the way around that, it's just something you learn as you go.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's definitely something I noticed right away, how important that was, that you involve him in conversations and allow him to speak for himself. Do you identify with any moment of clarity where you thought, okay, this is really how it's going to be, and now I need to change the way I do things because this is my new dad?
Yeah, it's, I don't know that I can identify one moment. There's been lots of moments. I remember when we were driving through from Utah to Colorado Springs with him, really thinking and reflecting on what is my role going to be, and worrying that if he was out in Colorado, I would disengage in relationship, just because I'm not good with the health terminology. I'm not good with a lot of the stuff, and so I remember feeling like I want to be involved in what's my role. I think because it was such a severe thing, and walking in that hospital the first time and seeing him, I think it was pretty evident to me that this was going to be the new normal from the get-go. Like, I don't know that I was ever, and my sister probably helped me out a lot with this, that I don't know that I really believed that his memory was going to come back, and that there would be some period of time where he would. And so I guess then there was the realization of he's going to need care the rest of his life. Like, he's going to need, I think initially when he moved in with me, somebody made a comment that the goal was he would be independent living at some point. And I thought to myself, that seems like false hope. That seems like, independent living, it just doesn't seem realistic based on the concerns that he had and the memory that he had. So then I also remember about 6 to 8 months in, I was really pushing for an MRI to see if doctors could study if there had been any healing in his brain that would be conducive to getting that memory back. And just their expressions and how they talked about the MRI results, nothing had gotten worse. But nothing, there really wasn't any, it didn't seem like there was a chance things were going to get better in terms of memory. So that wasn't surprising, but it was, I think at that point I was like, okay, so we got to start focusing on, what it's like to live with no memory. So I guess that was a little bit of a transition, but it wasn't one specific event or one emotional event throughout the whole thing. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, and I kind of want to just talk a little bit about like what memory care is sometimes for somebody that may not be familiar with that, or what that looks like. So it's going to change a little bit in what somebody remembers and what they don't. But what we see a lot when we're working with your dad, is we can have a lot of conversations and talk about things that happened in the past. And I think it's just a thing to clarify, and it's really helpful for somebody coming into a role where they're maybe working with their parent and they might be struggling to remember things that we had done today, or how do I do a specific task, or what do I do next. And so when somebody gets really frustrated or anxious, and when you're also thinking, how do I have the best relationship possible with my dad? Kind of what are some of the good habits and bad habits sometimes that we have when we're working with somebody that has a memory loss issue. When you're around somebody a lot, you can see like when their brain's firing, they're making connections. Kind of when you're talking about, do you understand what a wagon is? Before I ask you, point at the wagon. So you might have some leading up things that you're getting to make sure, you're building some bridges together. Sometimes you might be building bridges together of things that they understand from the past to connect to the future. But there's just a lot of awesome, positive things and relationship building things that you can still do with somebody that has a memory loss, and it affects people in different ways. But I think I've seen it sometimes. When we're talking to our team, when we're going through training and going through dementia training, we focus a lot on we're partially a role model for families, and that we can be an expert in being a caregiver to somebody with memory loss, but showing a family tips and tricks. So, if somebody's got a spouse or a kid that's a caregiver, and we do something in a way, as a professional, they might look at that and say, wow, I never thought about that way to encourage this person to do that, or how do I communicate better with them? Because when I do it, I just get frustrated. I don't know how to ask them to do this, and they don't listen to me, all of those different kinds of things. And so if somebody hasn't lived in that or been involved with it, it's hard to imagine, just how memory is affected. It doesn't affect everything for someone's whole life. And so we may spend time talking about something that happened 10 years ago and prior. And that brings somebody a lot of comfort. We try to get to know your family really well, because when you're saying your dad is anxious, if he's working with somebody that doesn't know him really well, to talk about those things that he can connect to, and they're all just connected to the things that are going on today. Sure. That's kind of where that's tough.
Yeah, and training people just to recognize how significant the memory loss. Like sometimes a struggle we had early on in the assisted living facility was that caregivers would make a joke with him, because he's a funny guy. He loves to joke around. But what they wouldn't realize is that that joke with him, something he would forget in 5 minutes. And so they would come back and they would still be laughing about the joke that they remembered, and he would perceive that as they're making fun of me. And so just training people that work with him that, hey, that's not that he's just not going to remember that joke that you remember, and so you have to tread lightly with some of those things. And those one thing with my dad is if he is trying to communicate something and you're not, or he perceives that you're not paying attention, he can get very upset and frustrated with you. And so talking to caregivers about, okay, if you're leaving the room to go switch a load of laundry, just let him know what's going on, so he doesn't perceive that as you're ignoring him and get upset with you. Or if he's in changing his clothes, you don't have to necessarily be in there with him, because that could be something that makes him uncomfortable. But he needs to also know that you can hear him and you're paying attention to him, so he knows if he has a question, he's not being ignored. So things like that and tricks like that and working with him are important to know. So.
That role that you're in, being the balancer and being that caregiver, when you're allowing someone else to come in and step into that role when you go to your to work, that's huge for people to have that confidence and the team and the caregivers. And one of the things that I love that's so extremely helpful, and Andrew, you mentioned it, how important it is to know somebody's past, to know their history. We talk about reminisce therapy. Would you share with the audience some of the things that you put together, the audio, the visual, the history, some of those things that the caregivers use and to get to know somebody and help build that bridge of trust, and use some of that in their communication and strategies and that sort of thing. What are some things you've done in the home?
Well, it gives me a chance to brag on my sister again, because she put together, it started off with a book that she put together with her kids' pictures in it and her husband's picture and hers, and they all recorded a message. So it's a cool little picture book. I don't know what company makes it. I don't know. Again, she's very good at finding these things. And so when he came to Nebraska, he came with this book, and he could see his grandkids' pictures and press a little button, and they talk to him. It was kind of a neat thing to see too, because at one point I started realizing that he had memorized the messages to some extent. Like he'll be listening, and if something's not, like my brother-in-law's message got erased somehow, not intentionally, but he'll see my brother-in-law's picture, and he'll be like, "Well, why doesn't Todd's voice thing work?" And he'll say, "He tells me he's my favorite son-in-law," and he'll laugh and he'll go, "He's my only son-in-law." And so those types of things, it's neat to, when he was in the assisted living, I took a page from my sister and I recorded messages on his cell phone. So if he was getting upset and frustrated, the caregivers there could just hit a message, and it's a familiar voice. He recognizes voices better than faces. And so when he hears his son's voice talking to him, he trusts that that's what's supposed to happen. And so we use that as a tool. He's teaching himself to read again to some extent, and so I put together things that are familiar that he would enjoy reading about. So there's a list of Lou Holtz quotes, because he's always identified with Lou Holtz because he kind of looks like Lou Holtz, and so it's a way to engage him and at the same time work his brain, because if you're saying you want to read something that he's not interested in, he'll say no. You have no, he won't do it. But if you say, "Hey, Dad, I've got these quotes from Lou Holtz, can you read through them?" And so he'll do that, and then we put a little series of sheets that he can read that are kind of his story, so caregivers can go through that with him when he's uncomfortable. And it's finding things that he'll engage in, and it work his brain too, that are kind of a skill for him. So
and helpful for both ends of the party. I love the family flashcards, I guess if you could call them that. Because you hold that up and he'll read, Brent's my son, and on the back that description, that's so wonderful, because then the caregivers are also getting to know the family and things that are important to him and things that he remembers. So that's such a neat thing. If families haven't already done that, that's a great tool to have in the toolbox. The albums that you have, I can't imagine how long that took to put together, whoever did that in your family.
The one for his dad. And some of that's just been like a huge blessing, because I don't know why he has that. His sister put it together. And I don't know how he ended up with it, but it's been great that it's there. It's been great for him. The flashcards with family names on them, with cortical blindness, it's how the brain processes things you're seeing. So when he gets anxious, one of the first things he'll say is, I think my eyes aren't working very well today. And so what we figured out is that his eyes struggle to process shapes and depth, but if you hold up print, he can read. And as he figures out he can read the print, he starts to calm down and his vision gets better. And so, it's just been kind of a neat trick that we've learned. So if he's feeling, even when we'll go to a restaurant or something, if he's feeling anxious and he feels like he's going blind or he can't see, getting something that's print in front of him and showing him that he can read it calms him down. So.
Yeah, a lot of times individuals that have memory loss understand that this is happening to them, but there's still a lot of questions that they have about that. I think our team's seen a lot of things that are, you have tough days, but then you have days that surprise you. So our team, when we're talking about how are things going with all the families that we serve, they talk a lot about how much fun they get to have with your dad, and they talk a lot about how they're surprised some of the connections that he makes. When you're saying he's relearning to do something, one of the things that he does is connecting their names with song. And so when he's hearing somebody's voice, you can kind of see the processors going, and he's like, I know who this is. You're familiar. Those things are all really neat. And also trying to do things that are new. We do a lot of things that are familiar. We know things that he likes to do, going out to the zoo and working with animals he loves. But when our team members say, let's try something new that he hasn't done before, I think that's really exciting. So when we're saying, if you understand, if you have some memory loss issues or something that's not perfect, right? But the ability to go do something new that's really exciting can bring a lot out of somebody. It's when you're thinking of just aging in general, and as different areas of our health fail, there's a lot of opportunity to bring joy, which are really neat. I know our caregivers take some pictures on his cell phone. So when I'm over visiting and spending time with your dad, sometimes getting to see his pictures when he's at the zoo, those photos are just the most genuine happiness, because I know he had a really good day. And some of the new things that they incorporate, I know one of the team members took him out to get a pedicure. That was a pretty exciting day.
Oh, he loves those now.
That is good. I'm sure he probably thought at the time, going through over 65 years of his life never having a pedicure, but somebody says, hey, let's go out and try and do this together. He has good relationships with our team, and so it's kind of a bonding time for them, but something new. I just like that he's willing to do those new things, but then encouraging people to not just think, well, this is the box that we have to stay in with the world and the role that we're playing. So
the fun part is most of the things that he does are things that I was surprised to find out that he could, like when Callie first suggested taking him for a pedicure, I was just like, what? And I think his first question was, do I have to take my pants off? So we assured him that he would not. And he loves it. And I think anything that I just get so happy anytime I hear that there's something that he's engaging in conversation, and anytime there's something going on that he's out of the house, that he's engaging and talking with people, it's awesome. That's what he needs to be doing. And he always says, I don't remember it anyway, but I still want to be out and doing things. And it's been great. It's been great hearing when people come with different ideas. There hasn't been a lot of ideas that, I think the only one I've been a little bit leery about is somebody talked about maybe taking him for a bike ride. I thought, we better
He might not have the balance to do that one.
With blood thinners, and I don't think that's always a great idea. But we didn't do that one. But
he's out living life.
Oh, man. He goes to the zoo. He goes, I think Michelle Delgado had a relative that lived right outside of town that had horses and goats and everything, and he just loves stuff like that. It's been neat. It's been neat to see that caregivers take risks, get him out and get him an engaging activity. That's awesome.
When we are talking with families and when we're talking with team members when they start, we talk about a family might be searching for us in a time of need because they need help caring for their parents, making their meals, doing laundry, just making sure they're safe. That's the thing that we start with, but it transitions a little bit in, how are we improving someone's life in a really dramatic way. Sure. I think I remember your sister talking about seeing some changes in your dad's happiness. in the part where he doesn't remember the things that we do every day, but he just knows that he's really enjoying the time that he has. So that's really cool. One of the things that you mentioned before we got started this morning, just as we're talking about a balancer, you said you're feeling really good about the start of the school year because your career, you're feeling like it's been a little bit of time now since you've started this, but feeling like you're able to get back settled in and you're doing really well there. So that's good to hear. Anything else that you'd say about how that's been going, that you just have a little bit more comfort?
Yeah, and I feel like what I was saying earlier is when my dad first moved in with me and when he first came to Lincoln, I had to learn to not be good at my job, which wasn't easy. I had to learn to not be good at my job, but to loosen up on my exercise, to not have a clean house, and things like that were tough because you feel like a failure sometimes when that stuff happens. But I'm gradually learning to find time to win that stuff back. So I feel like I'm good at my job this year. I'm connecting with kids. I'm coming up with ideas that help our school systems, and that's a good feeling, and it all comes from getting more centered and a better base established at home. And so when you're able to, when my dad first moved in with me, I was leaving work probably 3 to 4 times a week during the day.
And I know there will be people listening to this, and a lot of people that Karla and I know that is the norm, and they will go through that for a pretty lengthy period of time, and that's stressful. That age as a caregiver,
it's tough because you don't want to burden other people with your stuff. But when you're getting up out of a meeting and have to answer your phone, and your dad is going to be in a panic mode on the other end of that phone, I'm lucky. I live 5 minutes away from the school that I work at, so it was easy to get home. But it was difficult. I remember in May when he first moved. He'd been with me for almost 5 months, but he had basically an anxiety panic attack on a day that I was supposed to have test materials delivered to our district office and an all-city track meet that I was our track coach for. And so I get a call at 2 o'clock that he's out in the backyard shaking fences and screaming things, and neighbors are coming out. And so I had to go home. We ended up at the emergency room. I had to rely on I just had to basically let go, and people took care of the testing stuff at school. Phenomenal coaches stepped up and led the track meet, but it still didn't feel good. And knowing now that he's so comfortable, I haven't gone home from work all year this year, and I think maybe once last year.
We had a little flooding in your basement a couple days when we had rain that I remember meeting you over there for. So not every time that you come home is just a bad day, but I remember some of those days.
My basement, I think, flooded 4 times last year. That had nothing to do with him. I told him one of them was a self-inflicted wound. So my dad and I joke around about that phrase when we do something that causes more stress for us. We call them self-inflicted wounds. But him being calm and me being able to leave the house and have confidence that he's being taken care of, and let that go during the workday it's huge for my mental health and for his, and it's been great. So
what was, if you wouldn't mind sharing, you have some PRN meds, just in case, and with changes in caregiver and, like you said, his stress level, how did that change his medication plan?
The PR meds that we had set up, the just in case stuff, it's almost like a distant memory. Like he's never needed anything like that. Nothing. I remember when you came the first day, I think Michelle was there too, and just going through, spending hours trying to explain, now you have to know this and you have to know this. And I wish I had a recording of it, because so many of those things are completely insignificant because he's more at peace and he's more calm. the times when it's just him and I have changed dramatically. It used to be when he first moved in, he was probably waking me up 6, 7, 8 times a night. Sometimes in a panic, not knowing where he's at. There's occasionally he'll get up and go use the restroom, and I'll wake up and he always, I don't even need to wake up because he uses the restroom, goes back and goes to sleep. And it's just changed so much from when he first moved in. And I've asked him that before. I'm like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that you don't ask me to where the restroom is at the middle of the night? He goes, well, I think I just feel at peace. I feel calm. I feel like I know where I am a little bit more, which is great. It's a great thing to see. So awesome. Yeah.
That's a good feeling. It feels so good to hear,
Sure.
How we're able to support you and impact. It's interesting when you talk about priorities and how those priorities had to shift, had to change.
Yeah.
I remember we were talking about parent-teacher conferences not too long ago. So in our kindergarten parent-teacher conference, and she said, when Ruby brings you something and it's spelled wrong or it's phonetic, it's kindergarten perfect. And I thought that's such an interesting way to think about things, because we have this feeling that's like, I have to be perfect, and like you said, sometimes there's some balls you've got to drop because my priorities have changed, and that sort of thing. And I was really excited when you started training for the marathon, and we were able to support you, and for you to, have some of that where, you're taking care of yourself. Because some of the families and spouses and balancers that we help, they maybe neglect themselves because they're in this role. So talk a little bit about what you do, or what advice you would give to a balancer on self-care, taking care of you.
I think, first of all, you have to be a little bit at peace knowing that you're not going to find balance. I still don't have balance. I've found more time, but I would say find friends and family who are willing to kind of call you out to some extent, not in a mean way,
Be honest.
but to be honest, and because it's easy to shut down and push people away because you just don't have time for it. You don't have time, you don't. So, but I've people I work with and friends I work with that I run with that, keep asking me, did you run this week, or are we going to go for a run we do Friday afternoons a lot, and that's awesome. It's awesome that we kind of hold each other accountable, but that becomes a priority, and you find those times. You have to look at when you can find pockets of time for yourself. So my dad sleeps in, and I get up, at crazy hours in the morning, and that's when I do my exercise or sit and find time to read or catch up on work if I'm behind on work. And you find those because at 9:30 or 10 o'clock or whenever, then you're going to have to be on duty. And you feel a little bit better about the rest of the day if you're able to accomplish some things for yourself in the morning, and then be ready to roll. And to still keep those goals that you have in mind, but they're goals, they're not priorities all the time. So if I don't, if I train for a marathon, and if I'm not ready for a marathon, it's okay. My yard's not going to look perfect, but I have a vision of what I want it to look like, and I find time to make it look as perfect as it can look, and then you appreciate what you're able to do. To start with understanding it's not going to be perfect, but keep the reason in mind. If I were to think that there was going to be perfect days every day that I left the house, then I'm going to be disappointed, because it's not. You're going to have days where you get home and you're frustrated, or you're thinking, I wish this would have happened or this would have happened. But you have to always keep the overall picture in mind. Like if there was a day that was rough with his home care, then we talk and we figure out how to adjust it to make it better. But it's even a rough day is still me getting to go to work and him having somebody at home taking care of him. And that's important to remember that. It's important to remember that what the alternative is. I can't quit my job and be a caregiver, and it would be good for my dad and I's relationship. It wouldn't be good for my mental health, and it just wouldn't work. And so remembering that and remembering that the people that are working with him are learning to work with him, and so any advice you can give, and they're open. They want to be good at what they're doing, and they are. They have great hearts. Everybody that's come to work with my dad has a great heart, and we're a team. We're working together.
Yeah, I do. I think that is a great part of our success. A lot of times, if we might be supporting, like maybe say a spouse, we would be supporting the other one as respite for the time of their self-care.
Sure.
And if that failure to launch happens,
Yeah.
They're cutting out their me time, and then they're back at being a 24-hour-a-day caregiver. But some of those instances where it hasn't gone the way that we all wanted it to go are probably that feedback loop of let's learn more about you so we can continue to do this better. That's how we have really great partners, and that they know that we're working together in that way.
And they have to see everybody as a team. They have to see everybody as in it together and for the right reasons, and move forward as a team. You can't expect people to know what you would like to happen if you don't share that with them.
You're 100% right.
It doesn't work. My sister also reminded me of something. Like I got frustrated the first summer. Well, okay, so he moved in with me. We had a spring semester, and then that first summer there was a lot of turmoil, and then I noticed at the start of the next school year, and I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. And she reminded me, she said, Brent, when my kids start school, it's stressful. There's transition, and you have to. She goes, you might not feel like there's transition, and you might not think it makes any sense that it would affect, but you've got to just get through that transition period and get that routine established. And I was, yeah, that's good, because I never really thought of it that way. I thought with him not having a short-term memory, I thought, well, how does transition affect him? He would,
Right.
But it does. And so understanding that some of those different time periods are going to be more high stress than others, and not making rash decisions during those time periods is important. So
Yeah, we think that you're amazing at what you're doing. It's a tough job, and it's pretty introspective. You're learning a lot about yourself and your family along the way that goes with that, and it's definitely a sacrifice. It's tough days.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I couldn't do it without you guys' support or my friends and family's support. So, yeah.
Well, it's definitely an honor to support you and support your family, and we have caregivers fighting over those visits. They really enjoy the time. It's very rewarding on both ends, and that quality time. And I think for a lot of people, it almost becomes like a ministry of service. It's just a very enjoyable role to support your dad.
Good. I think the last part about that I think of is also when somebody's looking out for that care, and we've kind of talked about like what does the start of that look like, and they say this is what I need. But to really hear what the story is like of how that helps you to continue your job, and like the support, right? The product or the output that we have is very different than the tasks of helping someone with their everyday activities.
Oh, yeah.
And our team, from the time, our interview to hiring, helping them to understand the importance and the gravity and how what they do matters so much more than you would ever expect. Because when we're sitting down talking about these things, if we didn't share it with our team often enough, it could be easy to forget what that looks like in the day-to-day for them, right? I know you do an amazing job when you're talking with them at the beginning and the end of the day, and building great relationships with them, and they get to see that. That makes a big difference to them, so that way they know how much the work that they do matters.
They become part of our family. I mean, they do, and sometimes it's hard for me to get to work on time because I'm talking to Callie or Lydia or whoever's there, just about stuff going on with my dad, about stuff going on in their lives. Sometimes that we just sit and talk, and that's great. They do become part of your family, and I think that helps them better understand how to take care of my dad, and it helps me be more comfortable when I leave, knowing that they know something. There's a personal investment there, and that's good. I still remember when you guys came to my house the first time, and I remember when you called me at work the first time, and it was just an absolute blessing because we were in the midst of chaos, and I still remember you guys talking to me about home care partners, and just I think my response was, when can we start?
Yeah.
I think that was my. Yeah, it's been great.
I'm glad we did that together.
Yeah.
Well, Brent, we thank you so much. We're so grateful for you coming on today and for sharing your story and for sharing advice with the balancers out there who are in very similar roles. My last question is one that we're going to ask all of our podcast guests. So if you had unlimited resources, what would you want your golden years to look like?
My golden years. I've been joking around with coworkers a lot about this because my plan is to retire when I'm 55 and keep working in some capacity. But my end goal is I want to have an acreage and raise goats.
That's awesome.
And it'll be a good time. I'm already thinking about what kind of goats I want, and it should be fun. So it's good.
I'm sure when you retire, when you're out there with those goats, it's going to bring back a lot of those memories of your family, a lot of the good times and things that you've gone through. So thanks again for joining us. It's really good to hear the perspective of a balancer as we continue to kick off our podcast audience. So thanks for everybody that's joining. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to today's episode of the podcast. If you're listening to the audio version, please feel free to leave a review. And if you're listening to other versions, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to contact us with any questions or things we could help you with that you've learned from today, you can view our contact information in the description below, along with the information of our guest.
Like us on Facebook to learn more about the information we discuss and to connect with other balancers that are listening along with you. And please, feel free to send us any topics or questions you would like us to answer on the show.